Everybody, today we're going to be talking about how to draw Lewis dot structures with covalent compounds. We've already kind of talked a little bit about all the different types of bonds, and today we're going to draw them. So let's do just a little bit of review. Let's start here. So if you remember, we talked first about what a Lewis dot structure is. And a Lewis dot structure basically takes the most important part of the element, which is the valence electrons, and shows how many there are, because this determines bonding. So let's look at phosphorus right here. Okay, so here I have phosphorus. It has 5 valence electrons. Does this look correct for the way it's drawn? And the answer is no. And that is because if you remember, the way you're going to do it is you draw the symbol, and then you're going to put the electrons every 15 minutes on a clock, right? So like 12 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 9 o'clock. So it should, and we have 5 of them, it should look like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And this becomes important because these 3 lone electrons are available for bonding. And so that changes how the bonding pattern reacts. And so that's really important. Okay, let's move on. Moving on. Let's review what a covalent compound is. We talked briefly about 2 different types of bonds. So we talked about ionic bonds, and those are between metals and nonmetals. And those give and take electrons. So you create ions, right? So you create cations, which are positive, and anions, which are negative, and those are attracted to each other. The other type of bond that we're going to go over today is a covalent bond. And in covalent bonds, they actually share electrons. And these are going to be between nonmetals and nonmetals. So let's jump right in. So here is an example of a covalent bond. Okay, if you look at the top here, we have 2 hydrogens. So you know H2, part of Brinkelhoff, right? The 7 elements that are always found as pairs or diatomic. And notice that in the middle there, they are sharing 2 electrons. And so it's very important that you draw the Lewis dot structure correctly in order to bond the correct number of bonds. Now, the way to do that is to know the octet rule right here. So the octet rule is very important. So most electrons in the periodic table, most elements, they want the outermost valence shell filled with 8 electrons. So that's called the octet rule. Now, there are some exceptions, right? So the ones that only want the innermost valence shell filled or energy shell filled, like hydrogen and helium, they only want 2, as you can see in this picture above. So make sure you know how many valence electrons they want, okay? Now, let's talk about how we draw these now, because that's going to become important in our next topic, which is the geometry, which is really fun, actually. So let's take a look at this. There's 3 steps to drawing covalent Lewis dot diagrams. The first one is you need to add up all the valence electrons for every atom in the molecule. So here we have a carbon, and carbon is in the 14th group, so we know it has 4 valence electrons. Hydrogen is in the first group or family, so we know it has 1 valence electron. But notice we have 4 hydrogen, so therefore we have 4 valence electrons that the hydrogen brings in. So that's a total of 8 valence electrons that we need to have in our drawing, in our Lewis dot diagram. Now you're going to have to choose which element goes in the center. And you can do this a couple different ways. I always like to start with the element that has only 1. So we only have 1 carbon in methane. This is methane, by the way, CH4. And so since we only have 1, that will go in the center. You can also look at the electronegativity, and the one with the least amount of electronegativity is going to go in the center. So let's draw that in the center. Here's my carbon, and then I'm going to draw 4 hydrogen around the outside. So I have hydrogen, 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 and a hydrogen. So there's my methane skeleton drawing. Now I need to add dots for the electrons, and I'm going to need a total of 8, right? And so let's take a look. We know hydrogen only needs 2 because it is in it's that innermost shell that only holds 2 electrons. But let's start with hydrogen. We know hydrogen has, oops, that should be blue. Sorry. Let's draw that blue. Hydrogen has a single electron. So every hydrogen is going to get 1 electron. Okay, so far so good. Now carbon has 4, so we need to add carbon's electrons. Remember, we do it every 15 minutes on the clock. So 12 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 6 o'clock, and 9 o'clock. So count the electrons. Each dot is an electron. I have 8, so we're good there. Now I need to make sure that each element has what it needs to satisfy the octet rule. Hydrogen needs 2. Each hydrogen has 2. Boop. And then carbon needs 8. And if you look, we have 8. So we did it. That's it. I want to try one more just as practice, a little bit of a harder one that isn't quite so clean. So here we have water. We all know water is H2O. So we have, remember the steps. The first thing we need to do is count the number of valence electrons. Hydrogen has 1, but there's 2 of them. So we have a total of 2 for hydrogen. Oxygen is in group 16, so it has 6 valence electrons. We only have 1 oxygen, so that makes a total of 8 valence electrons, just like the last example. Now, again, you're going to pick which element goes in the center. Oxygen, we have only 1, so I'm going to put that right in the center. And then I'm going to add hydrogen on either side, like this. Okay, and the first thing I'm going to do is add the electrons for hydrogen. Boom and boom. Now remember that oxygen has 6, and so I am going to start at 12 o'clock, just like usual. So here's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and notice this one over here is already filled with 2, so I can't add another one, but I do have a spot for it down there. So notice I have a lone pair of electrons here and a lone pair of electrons here. So let's make sure that we have it correct. Hydrogen has 2, hydrogen has 2. Good so far. Oxygen needs 8, and it has 8. We did it. That's it. That is how you draw them. So we're going to practice, and on your worksheet, you have some practice problems. So on your notes, your guided notes with this video. Thanks, everybody. Have a fantastic day.